Welcome to ONS Energy Talks. My name is Ingvild Mæland and I'm the Program Director of the ONS Foundation. Today we will talk about megatrends and the future of technology. All developments need capital, also the green one. And to help us to answer some of the questions regarding this, we have with us Trine. She's the Global Head of Future and Tech Industries in DNB, the bank. Trine, welcome.
Thank you, Ingvild.
We'll just jump right into the questions of today, and it is on megatrends. You're positioned in a big bank. What are the main megatrends that you are seeing from where you're sitting?
Well, in the Future and Tech division, we are responsible for all the land-based, non-cyclical global industries. And this includes renewable and it includes infrastructure. These industries are based on global megatrends that we see. Growth of population, renewable green shift. We see the emerging markets, we see the healthcare challenges, etc. We also see other very important global megatrends now, like circular economy. I think about 2% of what we produce today is actually reused. We see smart cities, of course, and we also see the mobility value changing rapidly.
You say you're looking at non-cyclical industries, and oil and gas industry is definitely not one of them, being not cyclical. But based on what you're saying on the megatrends, which effects do you see for the energy sector in general, but also more specifically looking at the renewable energy sector?
Well, first of all, the population in the world is growing, and the standard of living for most of the world is also increasing, and we hope it will continue to increase, of course. This will of course demand an enormous amount of energy and a lot of clean energy. But we also see that a lot of the renewable energy that we see coming into the market today, like wind and solar, is intermittent. So, of course, one of the big megatrends going forward that we will need to follow and develop is actually to increase green power production, but also make sure that we have good storage solution and that we also can have load balancing that functions.
And building on that, because you're now into the energy transition and the clean tech development, which role do you see the capital and capital markets playing in fast forwarding this development?
Well, capital is certainly flowing from fossil to renewable energy. We see this across pension funds, insurance funds, commercial banks, multilateral banks, etc. This trend is actually driven by CSR, risk aversion, and it's really about positioning the assets for the future. The low interest rate that we see now and that we probably will have for a very long time is of course also very helpful as this is capital intensive. In the capital market, we saw green bonds being launched about 10 years ago, but it's really only the last 2 to 3 years that we've seen a good growth in this, and the bond market really applauding green assets coming to the market. We've also seen that green loans have increased a lot, especially last year, actually. And the latest trend that we see is actually sustainability linked loans, which means that the companies actually set their own targets for what they're going to achieve, and the margin will be adjusted according to if they reach their targets. We've seen large companies like Telenor, Hydro, UPM, Kymmene going into this market, and we believe this is going to be a big trend going forward.
Building on that, are we seeing a movement from kind of a reactive way of handling CSR and sustainability into a proactive, and see the different businesses seeing this as a competitive advantages to really deliver on being sustainable? How do you see your portfolio?
Definitely. I think that what we saw earlier was that companies were looking at what is the cost of going sustainable, whereas the change now really has been what is the cost of not going sustainable. So I think that's a huge shift. In DNB, we take this very seriously. We have set a very ambitious target to make sure that we can source 450 billion Norwegian kroner to renewable energy within 2025. And that's not only using the bank's balance, that's also using the bond market, the capital markets to source the necessary funds to develop renewable as one example. But we also have ESG high on our agenda. And when we grant loans in DNB, all loans above 8 million Norwegian kroner will be assessed for sustainability.
So when you're you have a big capital base that you're going to move into those renewable markets, but when you and your team are looking at finding the winners or finding the sector that you think will grow in the future, what are the main elements that you consider?
In Norway, we have a long history of building successful industries out of our competitive edge being our natural resources. In the recent years, we've also seen the clusters forming and strengthening to build new business models across small and also large companies. In DNB, we work very closely with these clusters. We think that's a really important source of information and connections, like the Startup Lab, like Oslo Cancer Cluster, for example, and of course all the many good ocean clusters along our beautiful coastline. In DNB, we also have the next conference where we gather investors, large companies and startups to create relationships for future cooperation. And that's also, of course, a great source to looking for the future winners. And we have, of course, our presence all over Norway and a huge international network of around 20 offices. And that also, of course, are scouts when it comes to understanding the trends in the industries and spotting companies. Maybe a good example would be the hyperscalers like Google and Facebook coming into the Nordic market to set up their data centers where they offer long-term PPAs. And based on this, it's a very attractive to fund assets like renewable energy to make sure that these data centers are green. But we also see other clean tech coming into the market and also being interesting for capital, both equity and debt. And clean tech, of course, is very much in the spotlight. I think for clean tech, the technology really needs to be proven, and it helps a lot if a large industrial company starts using it and can start up with a contract to verify the technology. We've been following clean tech very closely. I think one good example is we've worked with a Swedish clean tech company called Baseload, Climon, which creates energy based on waste and on geothermal energy. So that's a good example.
That's really interesting. And going back to what we were starting answering that question, you said it's important to make sure that the corporates meets the the scale-ups or the less mature companies. Where do you see the most advantages that can be drawn out from that meetings or that relationship?
I think first of all, knowing about each other. We've seen in Norway, we've seen over the last years that a lot of the international companies come to the Nordics to scout for new opportunities because they know that the digitalization in the Nordic countries is very high. So I think the larger companies, Norwegian companies, for example, have now started to understand that they need to be out there scouting for the smaller companies and the great ideas that they can use to continue to develop their business.
That's it. Going back to the renewable sector, because and we also have to see that in the light of the corona pandemic. How do you see, from your perspective, that the renewable sector has been influenced by what we've seen over the last months with the corona and the shutdown of the global economy?
I think there is a consensus, at least in the Western countries, that the situation post-corona will be used to ramp up the green shift. Reduced demand for energy and lower energy prices in this period doesn't seem to have a negative impact on investors or on the capital. And I think the main reason for that is actually the electrification, which will demand enormous amounts of energy. We've seen global value chains breaking up. But again, when it comes to building renewable, when you've built your renewable asset, whether it's a wind park or a solar park, it's really it's there and will produce for a long time and doesn't really need another flow of goods coming across borders. So we've seen very little problems in that sense as well. The vast majority of investors into the renewable space are actually dedicated infrastructure and renewable funds, and they have vast amounts of capital available and have been in the market through this period as well.
Mm. And now if you would turn back to Norway then, because there has been also a big growth in renewable development in Norway, even if we've had kind of the hydropower for a long time. From a capital perspective, what do you think is necessary in order to really fast forward the developments also in Norway?
Well, I think stable investment conditions is really the key. You need to make sure that the regulatory or the political risk is taken down to a very low level. One example of that is, of course, the onshore wind heated debate that we're having in Norway now, and with the government hopefully now coming with an updated regulation for concessions. That will take down that risk and again allow for more assets to be built where it's appropriate to build. But I think to secure financing, both debt and equity, for new technologies, it's crucial to have a broad political support to ensure long-term stable conditions. And one good example of that is Equinor and Enova in the high wind Tampen project with the grants there. The renewable energy generators have reached parity. I mean, they don't need subsidies anymore, and because of that, capital will flow into these markets as long as there are other stable conditions. They will attract capital.
No, I hear that all over the place these days that the renewable has not been hit that hard by the pandemic, and it's in a good flow, and kind of there's proof that the capital have stayed there throughout this period. Before we go into the end of the interview, I just wanted to go back to what you mentioned earlier on circular economy, because you said that is a megatrend which you see and which kind of potentially can disrupt business model. Could you elaborate a little bit more on how you see kind of the circular economy case?
Well, I think the whole ESG and sustainability issue really hit the broad or the man in the street really in 2019, and I think the awareness around everything we do and how we use the resources we have in this world is getting a lot more attention. So I think that you and me will be part of the drivers to make sure that we're not producing and throwing away. We need to actually reuse what we produce to save the natural resources that of course are limited. So I think we will see businesses tuning their business model and companies into seeing how can we reuse, how can we make sure that as much as what we take out of natural resources is actually used not only once but twice and 3 times, and etc. etc. So this will change business models. We've seen, for example, retailers in Norway starting to look at what kind of products they take in and how they can also allow for their business model to, for example, sharpen knives instead of just selling another one. And I think that's a good example of just a lot of small changes to make sure that we reuse our natural resources.
I agree with you. I think that the customers will make sure that this development happens even further, and it's there's a coolness on being kind of more and more conscious about circular economy. So hopefully we'll go that way. Going to the end of this, we talked about that all developments need capital, also the green energy transition. If you're going kind of to sum up how you see the relationship between the energy transition, clean tech, and capital, how would you describe that from your perspective?
The energy transition is going to take a lot of years. We will be needing oil and gas for quite some time yet. We see that a lot of the oil and gas industry have ESG high on their agenda, and we see that the capital is really also prioritizing the companies with a high ESG profile and targets. As for renewables, again, capital is abundant, and I think companies will be getting good terms, both in terms and structures, and then also pricing when it comes to renewables, because of this this high interest for the renewable assets. In DNB, we've prioritized this segment especially. We will support our customers with capital and with advice, which is also an important part of it, based on our extensive industry knowledge. This is really exciting to work with. The green shift is very important also to us in DNB, to our customers, and to the society. And if we succeed with this, we can also create new jobs, which is also really important for Norway in this energy transition. It makes it meaningful to go to work and to help our customer also reach their ambitions targets.
I hear that the green shift is here to come, and the capital is available, and kind of working together with the more established companies and the less mature companies will drive us forward when going into this. Trine, it was great to have you with us. Thank you very much. And also thank you very much to the ONS Energy Talk listeners. Thank you.